The highway stretched endlessly into the night, the faint hum of streetlights flickering above. Dr. Nye Arper's sedan roared down the empty lanes, its sleek black body gleaming under the pale moonlight. Behind her, two SUVs surged forward, their engines growling like predators closing in on their prey. Nia gripped the wheel, her jaw clenched in determination. The sharp cracks of gunfire shattered the tense silence as bullets struck her rear windshield, shattering it into a cascade of jagged glass. She didn't flinch. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, assessing the closing gap between her and the masked pursuers. She swerved sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding a truck barreling toward her. Her heart pounded as she calculated her next move. Grabbing her phone, she punched in a number. The line rang once, before a deep voice answered. "Opera, what's going on?" Judge Charles Whitmore's voice carried a mix of confusion and urgency. "They're trying to kill me," Nia said, her tone controlled but urgent. "If you care about staying alive, you'll meet me halfway on Route 72. I need cover. Now." Charles hesitated, but only briefly. "On my way," he replied before the call disconnected. Up ahead, the lights of another car pierced through the darkness. A gray sedan sped toward Nia, closing the distance between them. Charles Whitmore leaned out of the driver's side, a pistol gleaming in his hand. As he pulled alongside her, he shouted, "Stay steady!" Bullets erupted from one of the SUVs, ricocheting off Charles's car. He fired back, his aim steady despite the chaos. Sparks flew as his shots struck the pursuing vehicle's tires, sending it spinning off the road. Another SUV moved in, accelerating to ram Nia's car. She swerved sharply, throwing the vehicle off balance. With precision, Charles overtook the second SUV, blocking its path. Nia seized the moment, deploying a strip of spikes from her car, which shredded the SUV's tires. The vehicle screeched to a halt, smoke billowing from the engine as the chase came to an abrupt end. Both cars stopped in the middle of the road. Nia stepped out, brushing glass from her sleeve as she walked toward Charles. He holstered his gun, his eyes scanning the wreckage. "Care to explain why I just played hero?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with frustration. Nia's gaze didn't waver. "Victor Kane," she said. "He doesn't just want me silenced. He's coming after everyone tied to this case, including you." Charles stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "So, this is about the Kane corruption case?" he asked. Nia nodded. "And it's far worse than we imagined." The highway fell silent, the tension between them palpable as the truth began to unravel. What is the cause of this chase? What really happened? How did Dr. Nia know Judge Charles? Before the story continues, pause for a moment, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Every week we dive into stories of justice, betrayal, and redemption, where nothing is ever as it seems. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Now, let's get back to the story. It all started in a courthouse. The morning light broke over Valensport, the city's towering skyline glinting under the sun. At the courthouse, Judge Charles Whitmore presided over a mundane docket. He appeared calm, composed, and as unshakable as the mahogany bench he occupied. Dr. Nia Harper, however, had no patience for the courtroom's theatrics that day. Standing at the defendant's podium, she presented her evidence, a clear photograph of her car parked in a legal space. She explained her case with the same clarity and precision she brought to her law lectures. Whitmore barely glanced at the evidence. "The fine stands," he said dismissively, scribbling in his notes. Nia raised an eyebrow, her expression calm but her voice sharp. "Perhaps next time, Your Honor, you'll consider the facts instead of assumptions. Justice isn't about who sits on the bench, but who fights for the truth." Whitmore looked up, startled by her response. She collected her papers and walked out of the courtroom without another word. Her words lingered, unsettling him in a way he couldn't quite explain. The parking lot was unusually empty. The rhythmic click of Nia's heels against the pavement echoed as she approached her car. She fished her keys from her bag, her movements brisk and deliberate. A shadow moved behind her. Nia tensed, her hand hovering near her bag. Two masked attackers emerged from the shadows, their intent clear in their predatory movements. The first lunged at her, attempting to grab her arm. Nia pivoted smoothly, swinging her briefcase into his ribs. The sharp crack of the impact sent him stumbling back with a grunt. The second attacker circled, brandishing a knife. Nia's movements were swift, precise. She ducked under his swing, using his momentum against him to land a flawless judo throw. The attacker hit the pavement hard, groaning in pain. From a distance, Charles Whitmore exited the courthouse, his coat slung over his arm. He stopped mid-step, his eyes widening at the sight of Nia fending off her attackers with calculated efficiency. The first attacker recovered and pulled out a gun. Nia reacted instantly, grabbing a nearby trash can lid and using it as a makeshift shield. She knocked the gun from his hand and delivered a high kick to his chest, sending him sprawling. One of the attackers scrambled to his feet, clutching his side as he backed away. He pulled out a phone, speaking hurriedly. "She knows too much. Proceed with the plan." Nia's sharp eyes followed him until he disappeared into the shadows. She turned back to Whitmore, who approached cautiously. "What the hell just happened?" he asked, disbelief etched on his face. Nia straightened her blazer, brushing dust from her sleeve. "That," she said calmly, "is just the beginning." Without waiting for a response, she unlocked her car and slid into the driver's seat. "If you want to stay alive, I suggest you start asking the right questions," she said before driving off, leaving Whitmore standing in the lot, his mind reeling. The quiet hum of Valensport's bustling streets provided a false sense of normalcy as Nia Harper gripped the wheel of her car, her mind racing with the events of the day. The sharp exchange with Whitmore and the attack in the parking lot replayed in her head, but the urgency to uncover the truth drowned out her fears. She dialed Whitmore's number as she sped toward his office. "Whitmore, it's me," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "Harper," he replied, his tone tinged with exasperation. "You can't just call and expect me to—" "They're following me," she interrupted. "I need backup. Now." A moment of silence passed before Whitmore spoke again, his tone shifting to one of determination. "Where are you?" "Heading toward your office. But I don't think I'll make it without help." The glint of headlights in her rear-view mirror confirmed her suspicions. Two SUVs barreled toward her, closing the distance with alarming speed. Nia tightened her grip on the wheel, weaving through traffic to create space between her and the attackers. "So we got through?" Gunfire erupted, shattering her rear window. Nia swerved sharply to avoid another volley of bullets, narrowly missing a pedestrian crossing the street. She sped through a red light, her pulse pounding as she calculated her next move. As the SUVs gained ground, another car suddenly appeared, a gray sedan speeding toward her from the opposite direction. Whitmore's car skidded to a halt beside her, his window rolling down as he shouted, "Keep going! I'll handle this!" Nia nodded, her focus sharp. Whitmore accelerated, pulling alongside one of the SUVs. With precision, he rammed the vehicle, sending it skidding into a parked car. Sparks flew as the metal crunched, the SUV immobilized. The second SUV veered toward Nia, its driver attempting to cut her off. She swerved onto a side street, weaving through a crowded marketplace. The pursuers followed, their tires screeching against the pavement. Whitmore rejoined the chase, pulling ahead of Nia. He slammed on his brakes, forcing the remaining SUV to swerve. Nia seized the moment, slamming her car into the attacker's side, forcing them into a lamppost. The SUV crumpled on impact, smoke billowing from the engine. Both cars skidded to a stop. Nia stepped out, her breath ragged as she surveyed the wreckage. Whitmore joined her, his expression a mix of frustration and concern. "Do you care to explain what that was about?" he demanded. "They're not after me," Nia replied, brushing glass off her jacket. "They're after the truth." Back at the courthouse, Whitmore and Nia pored over documents in his office. Nia laid out her findings, a series of fraudulent cases tied to prominent officials. At the center of it all was the name Victor Kane. "Kane's not just any enforcer," Nia explained. "He's the one they call when threats need silencing. Permanently." Pearl bit her lip. Whitmore's brow furrowed as he pieced the puzzle together. These cases, they're tied to property seizures, bribes, even fabricated evidence. If Kane's involved, this isn't just corruption. This is a criminal empire operating under the guise of law. Nia nodded. And now that we're onto them, they're trying to shut us down before we can expose the truth. Later that evening, Nia and Whitmore retreated to her apartment to regroup. The adrenaline of the chase still lingered, but exhaustion had begun to set in. As Nia sat on the couch, tending to a gash on her arm, Whitmore handed her a first aid kit. "Let me," he said, kneeling beside her. Nia hesitated before allowing him to take over. His hands were steady as he cleaned the wound, his expression uncharacteristically gentle. His undercover team left the room. "You didn't have to get involved, you know," Nia said softly. Whitmore met her gaze. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing, not when I know what's at stake." A moment of silence passed, the tension between them softening. Whitmore finished wrapping the bandage and leaned back. "You're tougher than you look," he said with a faint smile. Nia chuckled. "You're not so bad yourself, for a judge." The shared moment of levity was fleeting, but grounding. They both knew the danger hadn't passed. In a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of Valensport, Victor Kane stood before his team, his expression cold and calculating. "They survived the chase," he said, his voice low but menacing. "I want every trace of them erased. Harper, Whitmore, anyone tied to them." One of his enforcers stepped forward. "What's the next move?" Kane smirked, his eyes gleaming with malice. "We handle this personally." Victor looked away. The moment fades to black, the sound of footsteps echoing as Kane and his men prepare for their next move. The night was quiet around the outskirts of Valensport, the kind of silence that concealed danger. Nia Harper and Judge Charles Whitmore arrived at the abandoned warehouse, its looming structure swallowed by shadows. Rusted metal doors groaned as Whitmore pushed them open, revealing a cavernous space littered with discarded crates and stacks of dusty files. "This is it," Nia whispered, holding up her flashlight. She scanned the room, her sharp eyes darting over the papers scattered across a table. Whitmore followed, his brow furrowed. "You're sure Kane's files are here?" Nia nodded. "These aren't just files. These are the linchpins of his entire operation. Bribes, fabricated evidence, and transactions that tie him to every corrupt official in this city." As they began rifling through the documents, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. Nia froze, her hand gripping a metal pipe she'd picked up earlier. Whitmore glanced upward, his face tightening with dread. The footsteps multiplied. Shadows moved across the upper balcony of the warehouse before descending the staircase. "Kane's men," Nia said, her voice a low warning. The first attacker charged, swinging a crowbar at Nia. She ducked smoothly, her body twisting in a controlled motion as she delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs, then flipped him over her shoulder. Before he hit the ground, her foot connected with another attacker rushing her from behind. Whitmore was no bystander. A heavy-set man lunged at him with a knife, but Whitmore sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the weapon clattered to the floor. With surprising agility, he landed a swift jab to the attacker's jaw, sending him sprawling. "Not bad for a judge," Nia quipped, as she leapt onto a stack of crates to evade another assailant. The fight intensified. Two attackers cornered Nia, but she moved like water, her martial arts training evident in every strike. She vaulted over a crate, using a chain she grabbed from the ground to disarm one of her attackers. With a well-timed roundhouse kick, she sent the other flying into a stack of barrels. Meanwhile, Whitmore found himself in a struggle with a taller, more muscular opponent. The man threw a series of heavy punches, each narrowly missing Whitmore, who ducked and countered with swift, calculated strikes. Finally, he used a nearby crowbar to block a punch and delivered a finishing blow to the man's temple, knocking him out cold. The warehouse was chaos, a symphony of clashing metal, grunts, and the sound of bodies hitting the floor. A slow, deliberate clap echoed through the warehouse. Nia and Whitmore turned to see Victor Kane descending the stairs. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew he was the most dangerous person in the room. If only Denton and Tenneth were in the same position, Denton probably wouldn't have taken Danton seriously anyway. In his hand he held a sword, a gleaming blade that caught the faint light filtering through the cracked windows. "Dr. Harper," Kane said, his voice smooth but laced with menace, "I've heard a lot about you. It's a shame you won't live long enough to tell your story." Nia stepped forward, her stance firm. "Your reign of terror ends here, Kane." He smirked. "Let's see about that." Kane lunged, swinging the sword with deadly precision. Nia sidestepped, grabbing a metal pipe from the ground to parry the blade. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal. Kane shifted to the guard approach, his elbows close to the man's jaw. The fight was a blur of motion. Kane's strength was undeniable, his strikes heavy and deliberate. But Nia countered with speed and agility. She ducked under a wide swing, delivering a kick to his side that made him stagger. Kane recovered quickly, his blade slashing through the air as Nia flipped backward to avoid it. She used the environment to her advantage, leaping onto a crate and launching herself at him. Her pipe connected with his sword, the impact reverberating through the warehouse. Whitmore, meanwhile, fended off two remaining attackers. His fists flew with surprising precision, landing punches that left his opponents reeling. Kane growled in frustration as Nia disarmed him, her pipe knocking the sword from his grasp. She followed with a spinning kick that sent him crashing into a pile of crates. "Nia!" Whitmore shouted, pointing to a device blinking ominously on the far side of the room. It was a bomb. Kane's men had rigged the warehouse to blow, a failsafe to destroy any evidence. Whitmore fought his way to the device, dodging attacks as he worked frantically to disarm it. Nia held off Kane, who had retrieved a knife and lunged at her with renewed ferocity. She blocked his strikes with precision, delivering counterattacks that kept him at bay. "Any time now, Whitmore!" Nia shouted, sweat dripping down her face as she parried another blow. "Almost there," he yelled, his hands working quickly to disable the bomb. As the timer counted down, Whitmore cut the final wire. The device stopped with seconds to spare. "Time to go," he shouted. Nia delivered one last blow to Kane, sending him sprawling, before sprinting toward the exit. She and Whitmore barely made it out as the warehouse erupted in a massive explosion, flames engulfing the structure and lighting up the night sky. Breathing heavily, Nia and Whitmore watched the flames from a safe distance. Whitmore clutched a folder he had grabbed in the chaos, flipping it open to reveal names and transactions that tied Kane to several prominent legal officials. "This isn't just corruption," Whitmore said, his voice grim. "This is an empire." Nia nodded. "And they'll do whatever it takes to protect it. This fight isn't over. They'll come for us again." The moment lingered on the burning warehouse, the crackling flames reflecting in their determined eyes. The tension inside Valensport's grand courthouse was palpable as the trial began. The once hushed courtroom buzzed with murmurs, the weight of the day's proceedings pressing down on everyone present. Dr. Nia Harper and Judge Charles Whitmore stood side by side at the prosecution's table, armed with the damning evidence they had risked their lives to uncover. Victor Kane sat confidently at the defense table, his sharp suit a thin veneer for his malevolence. Beside him sat his legal team, a group of ruthless attorneys notorious for bending the law in their favor. Kane's smug smirk never wavered as the trial began. Nia rose to present the evidence, her voice steady but powerful as she addressed the jury. "This is more than a case of corruption. This is about a criminal empire that has used fear, bribery, and violence to undermine the very foundation of justice in our city." She held up a folder containing the incriminating files. "These documents tie Victor Kane and his associates to fraudulent cases, bribed officials, and even murder. And today, we expose the truth." The trial proceeded with heated exchanges between Nia and the defense attorneys. Whitmore provided crucial testimony, recounting how he had unknowingly presided over cases influenced by Kane's network. His words carried the weight of regret and determination, shifting the jury's attention to the magnitude of the conspiracy. But just as the momentum turned against Kane, chaos erupted. The doors of the courtroom burst open, and masked men armed with weapons stormed in. The lead attacker shouted, "Nobody moves!" as panic swept through the room. Nia and Whitmore exchanged a glance, their instincts kicking in immediately. Whitmore leapt from his seat, flipping the table to create a barrier, while Nia grabbed a nearby chair, her body coiled and ready to fight. The attackers advanced, their intent clear: to silence Nia and Whitmore before the truth could fully come to light. The first attacker lunged at Nia, swinging a baton. She ducked under his blow, spinning into a high kick that knocked him off balance. Without hesitation, she grabbed his weapon, using it to parry another attacker's strike. Whitmore, meanwhile, grabbed a gavel from the judge's bench and used it to block an assailant's punch. He followed up with a sharp jab to the attacker's ribs, then slammed the gavel into his hand, disarming it. The courtroom descended into chaos. Jurors and onlookers scrambled for cover as Nia and Whitmore took on their attackers with remarkable precision. Nia moved like a whirlwind, using the furniture and courtroom fixtures to her advantage. She vaulted over a bench, using its edge to deliver a designating kick to an attacker's chest. When another assailant swung a knife at her, she deflected the blade with her baton, countering with a spinning elbow that left him unconscious. Whitmore proved just as resourceful. He used a chair to shield himself from a blow, then hurled it at an advancing attacker, knocking him into the jury box. Despite his age, his movements were quick and calculated, each strike landing with purpose. As the skirmish continued, Victor Kane slipped out of the courtroom, retreating to the lobby. Nia caught sight of him and pursued, her heart pounding as she closed the distance. Kane turned to face her, pulling out a concealed knife. "You should have stayed out of this, Harper," he growled. Nia didn't flinch. "Justice doesn't take shortcuts, Kane, and neither do I." She looked at Leo, and Leo gave her a confirming nod. The fight was fierce. Kane's brute strength clashed with Nia's speed and technique. He swung the knife with deadly precision, but Nia dodged each strike, countering with quick jabs and precise kicks. The lobby became their battleground. Nia grabbed a metal signpost, using it to block Kane's slashes before delivering a sweeping blow that knocked the knife from his hand. Kane lunged at her, but she sidestepped, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. With a final push, she pinned him to the ground, her knee pressing into his back. "It's over," she said, her voice steady but laced with triumph. The sound of sirens grew louder as police officers burst into the lobby, weapons drawn. They surrounded Kane, cuffing him as he sneered up at Nia. As the officers dragged Kane away, he turned his head, his eyes gleaming with malice. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You'll never stop the system." Nia watched him go, her expression unyielding. "The system isn't broken," she replied. "It just needs people willing to fight for it." She turned to Whitmore, who stood beside her, breathing heavily but unscathed. Together they looked out at the crowd gathered beyond the courthouse doors. Journalists, protesters, and citizens waiting to hear the truth. The screen lingered on Nia and Whitmore's resolute faces as the scene faded to black, leaving the audience with the promise of justice and the anticipation of what comes next. As the dust settled in the aftermath of Victor Kane's arrest, the echoes of his words still hung in the air. "You'll never stop the system." It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. Nia Harper stood outside the courthouse steps, her gaze steady as reporters crowded around her. Behind her, Judge Charles Whitmore spoke to a group of officers, his once doubtful demeanor now transformed into one of resolve. The weight of the battle they had just fought was heavy, but the victory, though hard-won, was undeniable. The camera panned across the scene, capturing the tense but hopeful atmosphere of a city awakening to the possibility of change. Do you think the justice system can ever truly be reformed? What would it take to fix something so deeply broken? What was your favorite action moment? Was it Nia's incredible martial arts skills, Whitmore's surprising combat prowess, or the tension-filled sword fight with Kane? Let us know in the comments below.